This is a very exciting project for the West Harbour waterfront. In community planning, we often deal with land use policy that's in a written form. So it's always an exciting project for us to be working on urban design studies, because then we can see how those words can be illustrated in a visual way. So the urban design study and the guidelines that result from it provide a useful tool for showing the intent of what our written land use policies and design policies say and intend to show. So to begin, I'd just like to highlight the emergency exits. There's one here at the front of the room and another at the back. The washrooms, should you need them, are through the back door and just down the hall to the left. I'd also like to introduce and acknowledge a few of the people in the room, including Calvin Brooke and Jessica Hawes from Brooke McElroy. They're with the consulting firm that the city's retained to prepare this study. We also have Ward 2 Councillor Jason Farr with us in the room, as well as Jason Thorne, the General Manager of Planning and Economic Development for the city. Chris Phillips with the Waterfront Development Office, as well as Paul Johnson, who many of you will know from the West Harbour Community Consultation meetings. We also have Christine Newbold, the Acting Manager of Community Planning, and our colleague Catherine Parsons, who's taking notes of the comments and questions that we'll be hearing tonight. As for the agenda, I'm first going to provide some background about the overall West Harbour redevelopment process and the role of urban design within that process and what the next steps are. Then we'll hear from Jessica about the specifics of the urban design study. Then when their presentation is complete, Paul Johnson will moderate a question period, and we'll follow that with some additional discussions and questions on the floor in front of the panels. If people want to point to specific things they see on those, we'll be here to answer those questions. Next slide, please. So the urban design study is another milestone in the ongoing process to revitalize the West Harbour waterfront. So this process started over 2 decades ago with efforts to reclaim for the public what back then was an inaccessible and primarily industrial waterfront. So you might recall that before the redevelopment of Bayfront Park or Pier 4 Park, there was really very limited access to the waterfront. But now you can go and visit those parks. You can enjoy the waterfront trail all the way from Coots Paradise under the high-level bridge and over to Pier 8. So things have been opening up over time, and this is a continuing on evolution of that process. Since the year 2000, the city's been acquiring key waterfront property from the Port Authority, and most recently last summer, the land around the former Parks Canada Discovery Centre was transferred to the city from the federal government. So that's the land where the ice rink is and the building that houses the Sarcoa restaurant. So you'll see them illustrated in the concept design plan. So the plan for an accessible public waterfront, the West Harbour Secondary Plan, also known as Setting Sail, was prepared and approved by the city in 2005. It came into effect by way of an Ontario Municipal Board hearing in 2012. So the secondary plan establishes the planning principles, land use designations, and policies that guide development throughout the entire West Harbour area. And it also recognizes the waterfront as one area of major change. So as the consultants will highlight in their presentation, the secondary plan sets out many of the parameters that the urban design study adheres to. Completion of the urban design study is a requirement of the secondary plan, as was the completion of the Waterfront Recreation Master Plan, which was done in 2010, as well as the urban design guidelines prepared in 2014 for the Barton-Tiffany area. So the secondary plan was prepared in consultation with the community, as have many of the other key steps along this process, including the Transportation Management Plan, servicing plans such as the environmental assessment for the sewage pumping facilities on Piers 5 to 8, the waterfront recreation master plan as well. So the recreation master plan is a companion piece that covers the area from Bayfront Park over to and including Pier 7. And it includes its own urban design guidelines that apply to that area. So the study we're talking about tonight, it doesn't redo that work, but it ensures that Pier 7 and 8 work together from a design perspective. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, the urban design study takes the secondary plan policies from a written form and illustrates them better to demonstrate what could be built in the future. The urban design guidelines contained with the study address the physical form and character of the proposed buildings and the spaces around them. The concept plans that you'll see tonight and are in the report, they aren't necessarily images of what actually will be built, but rather they demonstrate how the urban design guidelines could be applied and reflected in future development proposals. So these urban design guidelines, including the design checklist that accompanies them, they're a tool that will be used by staff to evaluate future development proposals before they're approved. And the secondary plan policies, of course, will continue to be applicable, as will other guidelines that we have in the city, such as the Transportation Demand Management Guidelines or the Pedestrian Mobility Master Plan. Next slide, please. So after this evening, there'll be some additional presentations. One will be made to the West Harbour Development Subcommittee coming up this Thursday afternoon, and also a presentation to the May 17th Planning Committee meeting. So it's at that May 17th meeting that staff intend to recommend to the Planning Committee that this urban design study would be adopted and used as a guide to evaluate future development applications, infrastructure and public realm improvements within the study area. So we don't anticipate making changes moving forward to the study, but we will, as I said, be providing a record of the discussion here tonight for Planning Committee to consider as well. It's ultimately will be up to council if they want to adopt the urban design guidelines or refer them back to us with requested changes. And next slide, please. So once adopted, the urban design guidelines will be used to guide future processes. So there's a number of those. That includes the creation of a new zoning bylaw for Pier 8, a plan of subdivision, which is what will legally establish the development blocks and open spaces, corridors, and the proposed street pattern upon the pier, as well as the real estate disposition process. And that is certainly a process of interest. The real estate strategy is an important next step, as it will determine answers to some of the questions that may not be answered tonight around the issue, for example, of affordable housing. So the urban design study promotes the development of an accessible, inclusive community. But the specific question as to where and how specifically affordable housing units might be provided isn't so much a matter of design, but rather will be left to that strategy. And in addition to the review of future development applications from the private sector that will come in the future, the urban design guidelines will be they'll be used to guide public realm improvements, including the detailed design of the proposed parks and open spaces and streets and infrastructure. Next slide, please. So as for timing and when we'll start to see construction begin, the urban design study, and Jessica will review this for you, proposes a phased approach to development. Certainly we have council direction to prepare the lands to a shovel-ready status by 2018. So what does that mean? Shovel-ready status means that the rezoning and draft plan of subdivision would be in place, which would enable development plans to be submitted. And then with regards to the real estate disposition strategy, it's staff's intention to move forward in the fall with an expression of interest. That would move the process forward and help determine who exactly would be building on Pier 8 and making reference back to these urban design guidelines that Jessica will present to you now.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you so much, and what a great turnout we have tonight. I'm very excited to see a lot of familiar faces. It was almost exactly 1 year ago today that we had then sat around tables in this exact room and talked about what the vision for Pier 7 and 8 can be. So I'm very excited to see a lot of the same faces in the room and a lot of new ones as well. My name is Jessica Hawes. I'm an urban designer and architect. I work with Brooke McElroy. I'm here with Calvin Brooke, an architect and urban designer, as well at Brooke McElroy. Well, he's Calvin Brooke, so not Brooke McElroy. So, next slide. So, what I'm going to be presenting to you today is an overview of the urban design study. I'm going to overview the vision and the key components that are outlined on the boards in front of us, but also that form the overall principles that are going to guide future development in this area. I'm going to overview the concept plan that Alan was talking about. This concept plan, as Alan said, is a representation of how development and urban design guidelines can be interpreted, but isn't necessarily exactly what will happen in the future, but it highlights all of those key components and recommendations of the urban design plan. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the community guidelines. So those are the principles and the key directions that designers will use when they design their buildings and their landscapes that will be located here. And then a little bit about that phasing implementation that Alan mentioned. So the purpose of this urban design study is to recommend a preferred community character and structure for the redevelopment of Pier 8 and its relationship with Pier 7. And really as an extension of the entire western waterfront and how they all connect together. This study has been an incredibly interesting one and a really collaborative process. This is the fourth public consultation meeting that we've been able to have on this, and we've had a lot of great discussions about what's possible and what can happen on this site. And a lot of them are very forward-thinking, visionary ideas about city building and what this space can be and how it can be special and unique to the city of Hamilton, but also a precedent community for communities all over the world, even in terms of the principles that it embodies. In terms of the study itself, this is the final phase of the study. What Alan's talked about is the document that's available online that I'm going to be summarizing today, and it's really the culminating document of the visioning process that we've gone through over the past year and a half. Just to summarize quickly what the consultation has involved, we started off with stakeholder interviews. We met with neighborhood representatives. We had a visioning session, as I mentioned, about a year ago today around big maps and tables, and we looked at precedent images of communities all around the world, and we really identified as a group what the characteristics of those communities were that we liked and that we didn't like. And what's embodied in this report are really those recommendations. We had two consultations at the shop front where we first presented a couple of options about what the plans could look like. And then we had a follow-up meeting where we really discussed what people liked and didn't like about those options. And that's really what forms the final vision that you see today. And then the third phase, which is this presentation that we're doing this evening. In terms of those options that were developed, there was two options, as I mentioned. Each had very different characteristics associated with them. The dividing factor between these two is the idea of creating a greenway that goes through the center of the community from east to west. Sorry, it's a little too bright in here for my laser pointer. But you can see from east to west, just south of blocks A and B, is the greenway connector. The main difference with this plan is that it has a centralized parking garage, so that very small amounts of parking are actually located on the surrounding blocks, and all of the development for the parking was located within this central location. In the next option, we looked at a version that we called the raised gardens version. What this did is it looked at what it would look like if parking was to be located in each of the individual blocks, and then gardens and courtyards were located on the tops of the buildings. And we discussed these in round tables and talked about the ideas associated and the pluses and minuses with each of the options. In terms of the feedback that we received, overall the principles in terms of the scale of the development that we were creating, we received overall support for that approach. People recognize that this really is a global leading opportunity to provide and create a distinct and new community in Hamilton. There was a lot of support for the idea of sustainability, and you see that interwoven through the whole document, that really the idea of having a smaller carbon footprint community and really being able to build in a sustainable manner was something that everybody seemed to agree on. That phasing was important, that the character of the linear park that faces the water needed to be better defined, and that explains some of the more detailed recommendations we have about potential programming and really exciting things that can happen in the park. That the streets themselves should be well framed by buildings. And you'll see between the two options, one had a roundabout and one didn't. We heard very clearly through those meetings that the roundabout was not the preferred option going forward. There was preference for the greenway running east-west that I pointed out in the first drawing. And also there was a lot of conversations about needing to provide the right amount of parking. This resulted in a number of key design principles, and I'm not going to go through them here because I'm going to go through them in the individual slides, but these principles really form the core recommendations for Pier 7 and 8. And a lot of the discussion focused around this idea of diversity. Diversity in architecture forms, diversity in materials, diversity in land uses and types of activities that could happen on Pier 8. And it was really about this idea of creating a community that was for a diverse group of people, and that it was really open and accessible to people through their programmatic uses. In terms of the ground rules, when we started this process, the secondary plan, as Alan mentioned, identified really key characteristics that were our starting points for the vision. A lot of those were related to building height, so identifying very specifically a range of building heights from 3 to 8 stories, and I'll show you how that lays out in the overall concept plan. That we maintain the existing open spaces that are in Pier 8, but we also create a new waterfront park that runs along the entire edge of the community. That's a minimum of 30 meters wide. It also provided a structure of roads and networks and how they connected together, so that was relatively fixed in this plan. And then it also provided guiding principles for the process. So in terms of that height structure, it really looked at in the secondary plan to really make sure that there's a very apparent transition from north to south in terms of the heights of buildings, so that against the existing low-rise community that you have lower rise buildings in that location, and then as you move further north into Pier 8, the buildings get a little bit taller, and then also that you have some of the lower rise buildings in the 2 to 4 story range that face the existing park. So it was really conscientious in terms of keeping these height recommendations that are in the secondary plan in the vision that we're presenting today. But most importantly, this vision is all about creating usable, programmed, open spaces for the entire city and the residents to enjoy. The linear park, you see the existing, on the left-hand side, you see the existing Williams Brew Pub, the skating rink. All of those elements are staying today in the short and in the long term through all of the phasing plans. But you see, in addition to those areas, you see that 30-meter linear green space that wraps the entire length of the waterfront park. Next slide, please. In terms of the urban design study, what we've done is we've identified a lot of new activities that can happen within this waterfront park that are going to create those diversity of activities that make people want to explore the entire edge of the waterfront. These uses range from skateboard parks to splash pads to a cultural garden to even a sand beach. And all the ideas that are represented in this master plan are ones that we discussed through our visioning sessions, but are also ones that will be further through the detailed design process. So this is something that will continue to evolve and change in terms of the exciting programs that can happen here. But the one element that's consistent in the entire waterfront park is a multi-use trail for cyclists and for pedestrians to be able to walk and explore and enjoy the water's edge. In terms of the orientation of buildings and streets and roads, maintaining those clear views to the harbor were very important, both north-south and east-west. So those view corridors that are enjoyed from the existing streets are retained and are framed with new buildings. And how we've laid out and looked at the programmatic features of the park is beginning to identify these gateway plazas at the end of each of these view corridors, which are really multi-purpose spaces for gathering, for yoga classes, for walking, for really enjoying and people watching. In terms of the destinations, we really wanted to make sure there was a really strong fabric of things that lead people through the park. So not only do people walk along the water's edge, but they're also led through that, through the greenway itself, which is a sustainable waterfront water management part of the streetscape, which is actually dedicated to pedestrians and cyclists, fully planted, which also has cycling trails through it as well. So we're looking to create really that rhythm so that people coming here for the day have a pathway that they can explore along the water's edge. You see the existing uses with the Williams Pub and the Sarcoa building, but you also see new community uses happening on the eastern side of Pier 8 as well to draw people through the community. I've talked already a little bit about circulation, but there's really a pedestrian and cyclist first principle in this community. It is about connecting to the existing cycling networks that surround, but also about creating very comfortable pedestrian environments, looking to create clear connections to transit and allowing people alternate modes of transportation in and around the community and the city. So every street has sidewalks on both sides. The blue line shows you the circulation for the dedicated cycling trail. All of these components interwoven together, it becomes a community that has vibrant streets with people out walking and exploring them. Part of this that's really important is the ground floor conditions. The ground floor is really what you experience when you visit a community. It's really your relationship between the ground floor and what's happening inside those buildings creates that vitality and that interest. It makes you want to walk into shops. It makes you feel like you're connected with the community. So again, that idea of diversity resurfaced as part of these recommendations and looking to create a variety of ground floor uses. With the yellow color, you see where residential units are wrapping the ground floor. So this is where you have front doors facing onto streets with front yards. You have that feeling of a residential neighborhood. You have individual people coming and going from their buildings, so it has that life and activity in the streetscape. That's also balanced with the blue color, which is the retail at grade. And these are destination retail, but also small format retail that support the people that are living in the neighborhood. You see that along the main streets entering into Pier 8 and framing the edges of the park. So you get that really strong balance between active uses at grade that are facing onto parks. And you can imagine that these are retail that support park users such as restaurants, concessions, etc. But you also have in the east corner, you also see there's also a mixed use at grade that happens in that area as well. So you really are drawing people through the community and there's always places to go and explore. One of the things that we took from the conversation about parking was that there really needs to be a balanced approach. The concept plan actually took the ideas of both plans and merged them together. It retained the idea of having a centralized parking garage so that some blocks, their parking is located within that garage and we can have at-grade courtyards and really sort of well-landscaped grade conditions around buildings, especially in those facing onto the water. And then in other properties, we have parking that's located in each individual block, and those are the ones where you see the parking centralized. So there's a real balance and opportunities of how parking can be resolved in this area. And we know in the future that solutions associated with parking are going to continue to change and evolve, and we anticipate that this plan is really one representation of how this can be solved, and that there's other solutions out there as well. So overall, that brings us to the concept plan for the Pier 7 and 8 waterfront. Outlined on this drawing, you see You see the articulation of the green spaces surrounding the entire neighborhood. You see a mix of uses that are happening in those green spaces. Some that are, as I mentioned, some that are green spaces, some that are hardscaped areas, potentially for skateboarding or for cycling or for gatherings in large groups. There's also those smaller, quieter areas with tree planting where somebody can sit and read a book and enjoy the shoreline's edge. You see associated with the development plan that there are 8 clear development blocks associated with it, 2 of them facing onto Guy Street, and then 6 of them located within the community. Number 9, or block G in the plan, is that centralized parking garage. This centralized parking garage is important, but it's wrapped on the ground at the grade, similar to the other buildings. It has that grade that's wrapped with residential development, so you have that rhythm of front doors. And then on the upper floors, it's slightly set back so that the presence of parking isn't an overwhelming component. I'll show you in some of the street views what that could look like. There's also a component of retail at grade associated with that parking garage as well. But what it allows for in some of the other blocks is creating these at grade courtyards facing onto the water, where you have development set back from the street line edge. You get a sort of entrance foyer or courtyard into the building that's landscaped, so you get that feeling of extension along the water. So these are some of the street views associated with it. So these are eye-level views. They give you an idea of the scale and proportion of spaces and the relative scale and proportion of building heights. As Alan mentioned and I mentioned previously, these are a representation of how the architecture and buildings could look, but really one representation that meets the guidelines as they're described in the document. The top view here is showing the Cultural Plaza, and it's a view looking south up Catherine Street. The Cultural Plaza is on the eastern portion of Pier 8. And it's really an area where we can begin to interpret some of the heritage elements associated with the shoreline and with Pier 7 and 8. You see here the potential creation of a structure using some of the existing materials that are on site today that begins a shade structure in the future. In the plan, there's also the idea of creating an Aboriginal welcoming space, something that marks the corner and marks the sunrise as well. That's in the shape of a medicine wheel. In the lower image, it's a little bit cut off at the bottom, but this is a view looking along Street A1, so that retail street that I showed you in the previous plan, looking towards the water. On the right-hand side, you see that rhythm of residential units and the parking garage that's set back behind it, with also green planting associated with that parking garage. In the distance, you also see, which is important to note, a variety of materials, a variety of architectural massings, a whole lot of different ways to design and look at buildings, because we anticipate that each one of these buildings should be different and should be a representation of the design and the architect, so that when you're coming to site and you're coming to Pier 7 and 8, you can really enjoy the architecture that's there. So these two views, the view on top is Gateway Park, which is, you see in the background, this is the Williams Pub. And then you see the southern edge of Block F, which faces onto that park at that intersection. So associated with this park, you see that there's that large glazing at grade. This is where retail would occur. You want to have a very transparent ground floor framing the street, and you also have a wider street set back here so that you get that ability to spill out from the retail store, have displays, have seating, have elements associated with the street that brings life and vitality. On the lower image, this is the north-south street, which is we refer to as Street B. Again, on the left-hand side, you see that idea of the ground floor rhythm of residential units framing the street, and you also see the massing of the building and that feeling of sky associated with the street. And the idea is really to create a proportion of the width of the street to the height of buildings that is comfortable and well framed. So this is a visualization looking northeast. What you see in front of you in this area here is the Gateway Park. This is Street A1 coming into the community. You have the Williams here, the skating rink, and the existing waterfront trust or Sarkoa restaurant there today. A lot of the master plan looks about creating a green community. Green in terms of sustainability, but also green in terms of the materials and the plantings and the landscapes associated with it. So there's a strong recommendation in terms of the creation of green roofs on development to offset the stormwater runoff for these buildings so that water is controlled and treated on site. You see the greenway linking east-west, creating that circuit that goes around the linear park and back around past future institutional building and community uses on the east side of the development. I'm not going to go through each one of these points, but I think it's really important to talk about the diversity of architectural styles that are represented in this and the diversity of open spaces that are created as part of this master plan. Really the most important piece coming to this is really creating a variety of activities for people that draw them to the waterfront, to make sure it's vibrant, to make sure it's active, and to make sure that this is a place that people want to come back again and again. This is a view looking west. You see here the Wabanong, which is the medicine wheel structure that could be something that reflects the Aboriginal culture in the area. You see the structure that's potentially made out of elements that are existing on site today. These are all ideas that will be developed further through the implementation of the linear park, but they're ideas that are embodied in the urban design study, and they're ones that came through the consultation process and through the visioning process. In terms of the buildings and the architecture, there's a lot of attention that was paid towards this idea of different types of materials, different types of architectural styles, and also different architectural shapes, so that there's a real landmark feeling as you're moving through the community, that there isn't that feeling of sameness, but that you really identify, if you live on the waterfront, which building is yours by its characteristics, or if you're exploring the waterfront, you can identify your favorite buildings as they're being constructed. In terms of the overall development statistics, ultimately in terms of the total GFA, there's about 125,000 square meters of GFA associated with this. Now that's gross floor area, so that's every floor plate of every building all added together. In terms of the commercial uses, there's about almost 8,000 square meters of space. And institutional, which is a very important component to this, there's also about 7,000 square meters of space. And in terms of residential GFA, there's about 110,000 square meters of space. Now, in terms of the potential units, it's very hard at this stage to know how many units would result from this community, because a lot of that is going to be market driven. A lot of that is going to be based on decisions that the city makes going forward through their disposition strategy. But looking at a range of units from about 700 square feet to 1,100 square feet, or 70 square meters to 110 square meters, you're looking in the range of 1,000 to 1,500 units. And that really is going to vary in the future as decisions are made and as the developments are planned in more detail. In terms of the plan and the concept plan, we see the availability of 1,420 parking spaces, and of those, on-street parking is an important component of that for visitors coming to the area as well. Overall, in terms of the balance of public versus private, it really results in about 43% of the lands being part of the development lands for residential, institutional, or commercial uses, and leaves about 57 in terms of public spaces. So those are streets, parks, open spaces. So a large part of this area is protected for the public as well. In terms of the core community guidelines, the guidelines are divided into 5 key categories. Open space design and character, infrastructure and sustainability, how the community works, how energy is considered, how green roofs are considered, and what the guidances are for them. All of the elements that are kind of the grassroots starting places for the design. There's recommendations on street designs and the elements that be included in them. So things like the minimum width of sidewalks for accessibility, ensuring that there's cycling trails in the right places associated with streets. There's recommendations for parking, and there's also recommendations on building design and character. So in terms of the open space guidelines, the open space guidelines look at form and function and how people move around the community and what are the activities that can happen there and what are the elements that a designer should think about when they're laying out this community to make sure that it meets the community's vision. What we've identified is that there's 5 types of open spaces in this area. Those are the waterfront park itself, which is the future condition, so the new waterfront park. The existing conditions of the waterfront park today, so where the skating rink is in the Williams Brew Pub. There's the greenway component, and what the character of that will be. Given that that's going to be a pedestrian and cycling street only with no cars going through it, it is going to be mostly a landscaped street. And the idea of this street is that it's going to handle and deal with stormwater that comes off of the roads, and it's going to clean it and filter it before it goes back into the water table. So this is actually a street that's framed still by residential uses, so it has people coming through it and going in their front doors and really navigating the streetscape. But it's also a very special street in terms of how it deals with water and how it really is a symbol for this community. There's the Gateway Park, which is here today, which will have some transient boating docks associated with it, but it's also a spill-out space. It's an area where the retail that's along Block I and facing onto the street, and the future retail, waterfront retail, that's happening on Pier 7, it's an area where this can meet. This is a place where we can have market stalls that can become vibrant and active and really contain a lot of that vibrancy and retail life that's going to come with part of these land uses. And then lastly is the idea of creating a mid-block connection. And that's just reinforcing that this is a walkable community. The block sizes are small. They're really easy for walking around and walking through. In terms of parking, overall in the urban design plan, the vision is that this site is not going to have surface parking associated with it in the long term. There'll be on-street parking as part of the street designs and small convenience parking in some areas, but for the most part the parking is going to be in structures and it's going to be located behind the faces of buildings. So this isn't going to be a predominant characteristic of the community. I'll talk a little bit about phasing and how those existing parking lots that are there today can be retained for the short and the medium term to really provide those important services until a parking garage is in place that's going to provide that parking that's needed. But like the other components of the master plan, this is a real opportunity to be sustainable in terms of how the vision for parking can be done. So in the streetscapes, looking at dealing with stormwater with permeable surfaces so that water is not gathering, that it's percolating down into the water table, creating green edges to parking garages. So the existing centralized parking garage, the idea that it has planting associated with it, that it has a greenery associated with it to really change the idea of what a parking garage can look like. And then also lastly, recognizing that the needs for parking in the summer and the fall are very different than the needs for parking in the winter. So having areas that sometimes are parking and sometimes are public space. So when we do in the winter time want to be a little bit closer to our cars and want to have the convenience of being able to enjoy the water's edge without having to go too far out into the cold, that those are provided through the design of the open spaces and the parks. I've spoken a lot about building design, but I just want to reiterate this idea of the precedent images that we looked at as part of the visioning session a year ago today. The precedents that were decided upon as being really the preferred ones are the ones that really looked at architectural excellence. They're ones that looked at forward thinking in terms of architectural design and really creating very special and unique spaces with varied and diverse architectural styles. Variety of materiality, variety of scales and massing, and also variety of open spaces and how buildings relate to them. And that was really the starting point of this entire vision for this master plan process. In terms of the phasing in the short term, the first phase that's identified in the master plan are the 2 blocks that are facing onto Guy Street, with the lower-rise residential facing onto Guys, and then the buildings getting taller as they come into this site. This will also see the establishment of the street network associated with those blocks, but you can see that the existing functions and parking lots of Pier 8 will remain in that short-term period. In the medium term, you see the development of the parking garage in this location, future community uses, and a mixed-use building with residential or employment above. Having employment in this area and having people working here during the day, I think, is a really important part of this vision. It's not just about living here, it's not just about shopping here, but it's people who are going to be here from 9 to 5 that are buying their lunches, that are walking in the parks, and are really enjoying this beautiful piece of the waterfront. And then in the last phase, you see the full build-out of the new institutional building at this corner of the development, and then 3 new residential buildings with, again, a mixed-use building at the corner. With that, you see the final completion of those buildings, but you also see the full completion of the linear park as it's constructed. Now that my laser pointer's working, I'm just going to point out some of these key areas of the waterfront vision. We have on the west side of the development the Sunset Amphitheater, the idea of introducing something that allows people to really just sit and enjoy the sunset in a raked seating scenario, someplace where events could be held by local groups, meetings held, etc. Looking at creating a sort of multi-use, almost family and children's area associated with it that has playgrounds, a splash pad. These are all programmatic ideas that are presented in the master plan to go forward into the next stages of design. I talked about the idea of creating these open gateways at each of the view terminuses, and this gateway is actually really an open multi-purpose space, and what happens in each of these spaces is really up to the community and how you use them. But we've seen examples of people having yoga classes here, of people learning to ride bikes in these areas, people sitting and reading a book and enjoying the waterfront. But we've shown them as a boardwalk, a beach, and a cultural plaza, but what they are in the future is really part of the next discussion and implementation. In terms of our next steps, Alan's already gone through them for you, but just to reiterate, we'll be presenting the vision that we presented today to the Waterfront Development Subcommittee on May 5th, so on Thursday in the afternoon, and we'll be presenting this to Planning Committee on May 17th as well. So again, I'd like to just say what a pleasure it's been working on this process. For those of you who have been through this process with us, who've been to all the meetings, how much we've appreciated your feedback and how really, in terms of developing this vision, this is something that we're very proud of, but also as a community, we feel is a wonderful opportunity and representation for the City of Hamilton and for Pier 8. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Jessica. And we're going to move now into the next period of our time together to allow time for questions and for comments. So I'm going to tee up the approach that we're going to use this evening, just do a bit of background on how the next period of time will work for us, and then we'll have a chance to answer questions. Jessica's here to do that, as well as some staff if it leads into that realm, and or hear your comments. So in terms of the spectrum of engagement, tonight's meeting is about information sharing. So this is an information session for you to hear the results of the urban design study that will now move forward into our decision-making framework at the City of Hamilton, and that is through our subcommittees and committees of City Council. I do want to acknowledge that Councillor Collins has joined us this evening. Councillor Vanderbeek is here, and I know there are representatives from Councillor Green's office and the Mayor's office as well. So welcome to those, in addition to Councillor Farr, I think, who was acknowledged by Alan at the beginning of this meeting. So because this is an information session tonight, the way I'd like to work through the next 40 minutes to 45 minutes or so is to ask you to think of questions or pieces of feedback that you'd like to provide. And as we go through the room, you can indicate with a hand. We have a microphone so that you can be heard. You can make a question, or you can ask a question, you can make a comment. I will let you know that we are capturing the comments and feedback of this evening, and we'll be providing that as some further context. But as was mentioned, the report is moving forward through our legislative process at the moment, but what is said tonight will be captured in addition to what has already been captured over the past number of months. I'd ask you to think about how you can be concise in your question asking or in your comment so that we can move through as many questions and comments as we can this evening. I am going to limit you to one question or one comment, but always the ability to come back to you at some point once others have had a chance to ask one of their questions or make a comment. And that way we can make it through as many people as possible. The last thing is, once we end the open question and comment period, staff are going to stay here till at least midnight or 1 a.m. To allow you to engage with them one-on-one and ask some more questions. And midnight 1 a.m. is obviously an exaggeration, but it is going to allow you an opportunity to engage and provide some continued pieces of feedback or ask a question, because we have also had a number of people this evening, or a few people directly, and we know that there's a number of people that over time have said, I'm just not comfortable asking my questions or making a comment in a room of this size. So this allows that to occur as well. So with that, I'm not sure where our microphone is. Christine has our microphone. That's wonderful. My name is Paul Johnson, for those of you who weren't here right at the very beginning to hear the list of people who would be working with you this evening. And what we'll do now is open the floor up for questions and comments. Christine's going to move around with the mic, and we'll answer your questions as we can. And there's one right here. Christine, we'll start at the go 2/3 of the way back, and then we'll head up here to the front. Thank you. And maybe if you could stand, please, when you do ask your question. And if you could maybe give your first name, let us know who you are, that'd be great.
My name is John, and I appreciate the pretty pictures they've shown us, but I have a concern with the implementation of the elements of the West Harbour Vision draft. And in particular, the culture section and the second section of that, which calls for the maintaining historic buildings and structures. There is only one historic structure on Pier 7 and 8, and that's the Sea Cadet Corps. It was built in 1948, and at the time it was built, it was directly on the shore. And has been landlocked by the fill of Pier 7 and 8, the construction. So I'm looking at the picture, and there's no indication that they have considered retaining that structure at all. Can you tell me whether it's been taken into consideration that that building should be retained?
That building in particular, no, it's not a designated heritage building. There certainly are buildings upon the property that have some elements that could be used to tell the historic story of the pier, and the intent was to perhaps take some elements from those to be able to tell that story in an interpretive way. Throughout the promenade around the edge of the property. That was part of the idea with the cultural plaza, perhaps looking at the ability to repurpose some of the materials from some of the old sheds to create that structure. But as far as the future of the actual building that the Navy League is currently in, it is most likely going to be removed in the future.
Other questions?
So there's a question here at the front, and then over here in the blue, and then I'll ask for a show of hands again as we continue to move around. Thanks.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris. I recently moved into West now. So you mentioned a lot of green space in the plan. Do you have any plans for community-based food production, like a community garden, something like that?
We haven't specifically identified where that could happen, but we have definitely thought about the idea of community gardens, especially associated with the green roofs that are happening well, ideally recommended in this document on all of the buildings. So we think that that could be a really important piece of it. But we haven't specifically identified it. It's a great suggestion.
Hello, my name is Eileen, and the one question I have right now, I hope I'll get a chance to ask a few more as the evening proceeds. But I'm very, very interested in what you're calling this medicine wheel design, and who and when of the Aboriginal community in Hamilton did you consult with, and what part will they play, which I hope you're going to say something to the effect of they will have the complete ability to plan every single detail involving First Nations culture on our waterfront. So thank you for this one. I hope I'll be back.
Thank you very much. That's a very important point, and you're absolutely correct. As part of the master plan, we identified cultural components that could be, this is not a design of what we think should go there. You're absolutely right. Anything that would go here that would be tied to the Aboriginal communities of the area would be developed by them and through them through the implementation process. 100%. You are correct. Thank you for making that.
Okay, there's a hand up in the middle, about 2/3 way back. Then we're going to come up here to the front and then head over to this hand that's at the back against the wall. So yes, the one right there where you are, Christine.
Hi, my name's Carol. I hope I can word this succinctly. At the east end of Pier 8, where the Haida is, just to the east of that, yeah, the previous picture would have been better. To the east of that, just beyond the Haida, you can see in the water a little bit of a pier sticking out. That pier is presently used by a grain handling facility to load grain onto ships to go all over the world. Also on that property, in a few short period of time, a new flour mill is coming to the waterfront, and it will be built behind those grain silos. My question is, what has been done in terms of environmental assessment, or what is going to be done to consider the health impacts on the people who are going to reside on that pier? Because there is quite a bit of dust that's being picked up by that operation. And then we have all the other environmental factors down there as well, where the air quality really leaves quite a bit to be desired. That's my question.
As the development proposals come forward, I mean, certainly there is the interface here between approved residential areas and existing industrial uses, and that'll need to be addressed. And it will be something similar to other instances where development is permitted and adjacent to other land uses that might emit things like noise or dust. And in many cases in these situations, there's some noise warning clauses that are included in agreements of purchase and sale. So that's one way that it could be addressed. I don't know specifically what might have been done in terms of environmental assessment when the secondary plan was first put in place. I'm not sure if any other staff here might have that history.
So I'm going to suggest that in the time where we break out to speak to staff, that maybe you can direct the specific concerns to Chris Phillips, and he can take away some of the existing pieces. Alan's asked about sort of future things with the existing pieces, and Chris can get you information if we don't have it right here tonight. Christine, in the sake of not having you run up and down, there was a question right against the wall on that side, and then we'll come forward. There's a couple here at the front of the room.
Hi, my name's Peter, and when I look out on the bay, I see a natural undulating coastline. When I look at our proposal, I see a rectilinear coastline, question mark, and I really question my sense of comfort with what I'm seeing. I think we could have done, and maybe you have considered something else, but I'm not comfortable with this looking like an urban block when we have an opportunity to make it look natural in keeping with the rest of the coastlines on the bay. This looks to me more like an industrial type of outline. I'm really not comfortable with that, and I think we ought to review that concept. The amount of detail that you have done is incredible, but that detail can also fit, I assume, can also fit an outline that is much more in keeping with the rest of the bay and will be attractive for hundreds of years to come. This is what you're doing right now. You're planning for hundreds of years to come, and we really need to step back about the overall shape of this thing. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it's a great point. I remember we discussed this actually at previous sessions, and I think that a lot of this goes back to the precedent studies and the community work that we did in terms of looking at the overall visioning of community. The precedents that we looked at were really about urban communities and urban waterfronts, and really creating a very vibrant urban waterfront. And a lot of this has to do with a small block structure and being able to move very easily through and between the neighborhood. So a lot of that is indicative in the plan that you see today.
Sorry, we're going here and then up to the front? Okay, just make sure you make your way up to the front after that. We'll get some here, really.
Hi, my name is Sandra. I want to make a comment about ground floor. I guess it would be retail. It's going to be phased in, I assume, as the buildings are built. But is there going to be space at ground level, perhaps for city children's programming in some of those indoor spaces? And perhaps the cadets could also use that space.
Thank you for making that point. Actually, that was one that I was going to make as well. So we don't define through this master plan what those ground floor uses could be, but I agree that those are all great suggestions, and I think retaining the cadets on site in a new space where they can make use of the amenities here is one that I think would be great as part of the study as well. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to head up to the front here. There's a couple, one here, and then we'll move back.
I'm going to go up and then we're going to come back.
Yep. We're doing well for time. We're okay. Thank you very much for being clear, concise with the questions, working out perfectly.
Hi, thank you. I'm Tibor. I'm just wondering, what is the transit plan for the connection up to the GO station and the stub coming down from the LRT?
I got this out. The plan for the North Spur is that the LRT would run in mixed traffic all the way down James Street. The initial funding allocation had it going to the West Harbour GO station. Metrolinx then provided the ability for us to plan all the way to the end of James at Guy Street. And we've planned for that to happen with a total of 5 stops, one in the center of the city, at Cannon Street, at the GO station, at Ferry Street, and at the waterfront. And so it would come all the way down James, but its running style wouldn't be segregated from traffic. Traffic would actually drive on the tracks as well as the LRV vehicle, and it would come down. And we really hope that within the funding envelope, we can make sure it comes to the waterfront. So that's the plan at the moment.
But just to add to that, so the LRT itself won't necessarily be coming right onto Pier 8, but there certainly could be an opportunity for the HSR bus routes to make a loop within this development. If there were to be a station ultimately at the north end of James Street, leading out from there, it could loop up into the area or extend further along Burlington Street to the east. So when this plan was being developed, the HSR had commented to the the street widths, just to make sure that they would be able to accommodate buses should they choose to do that routing in the future.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Ted. Although there hasn't been a detailed discussion about this tonight, I do hope and trust that there has been regard given to where things like SOBI hubs would be located and whether or not you can get into a partnership with somebody like Community Car Share, for example, to be able to try and reduce the numbers of cars that are owned by residents. But my question is, are there any residential buildings that will actually be proposed with no parking at all? Notwithstanding that I would hope that these buildings would have well under one parking space per unit in any case, because that could have an unintended consequence of actually disenfranchising some folks who do rely on a car, such as those who are disabled or the elderly.
So what we've shown in the concept plan today is that there are some buildings that don't have dedicated parking associated with those buildings. We do anticipate that those buildings would have to have drop-off facilities and accessible parking associated with them so that all members of the population are served in terms of the sites of where they would like to live, and those minimum standards would need to be met on every site. But there's a variety of ways parking can be solved, and as you sort of eloquently said, the way that we're planning for parking now, in terms of planning for car share programs, all those elements are really an important part of this. We don't know exactly what the right answer is, because not knowing exactly what the number of units are going to be, it's hard to say. We know capacity in terms of how many parking spaces could be provided, but it is a very careful balance, as you said, to not make sure there's too many, but to also make sure there's enough. And I think that's something that the city's committed to going forward.
Thank you. My name is Paul Herman. I'm speaking here tonight on behalf of a group of people. Sorry? Talk right into the mic. Is that better? Sorry. I'm speaking here tonight on behalf of the planning group from Harbour West Neighbours, who largely consist of people who have been working on this since about 2002 and who were the neighborhood residents who supported the idea of moving housing and expanding the neighborhood onto Pier 8. And Calvin, can we have that slide, please? So that we're here tonight to say we welcome the kind of work that's being done with regard to this project, and think a lot of good thinking and a lot of hard work and good work has been done. But there are, when you get to the details, a number of questions. And we have been asking for the last 3 months for an opportunity to sit down with the consultants and ask them those questions. And we thought that was happening tonight. But it's quite obvious that this is not the forum for our planning to meet with the consultants tonight, and we're hoping, Paul, my first non-question is, are we going to actually have an opportunity to sit down with your consultants and go through the 18 questions we actually have about this development, without boring all the people in this audience?
Well, certainly they're going to be here, Herman, so we're wrapping this portion up at about 8:30. More than welcome to engage there and continue that process tonight.
All right, then the question, once the slide is in focus, needs a little bit of reduction. That's not the slide, folks. This is not Biology 101. The work that was done on this plan is much more detailed than this. Control minus should do it. Well, while you're doing that, may I just frame the question, Paul?
Yes.
Every vehicle that gets to Pier 8 has to go through the North End neighborhood, whether they're coming as tourists or shoppers or residents. And that was looked at very carefully in 2005, and in cooperation in a working partnership with the neighborhood. And we determined at that time, for example, with the aid of consultants, that the development of what was then proposed for Pier 8 would put 490 additional cars in 1 hour on John Street. And as a result of that, the traffic management plan was approved. Kelvin, can I see the traffic management plan for just a second, or is that going to cause you a problem?
I'll try.
Okay. There we go, we're getting close. Right. If you look at the corner of John and Guy's, can you put your red light on that, please? You'll see John and Guy's. That's there. Keep going up. There we are. Okay. You'll see that there is a physical restriction on John Street there, and there's worst comes to worst. Embarrass me by not knowing where to put the button on this thing. Good luck.
It should be a silver one.
Okay, right there is a physical restriction on John Street, and the text says that the physical character of John Street will be restricted to prevent vehicle traffic increasing as a result of the developments on Pier 8. And there are 2 schools on John Street and any number of children. And my question to you, if we go back to the previous slide, can I go back if I can? That's right. The question is, you'll see that the James Street is in yellow and it brings you right up to Guy Street. And James Street was designed and designated as the 50K speed limit road to bring people to the water's edge. And how will you work and how will this program work to ensure that the traffic generated for Pier 8 is not funneled through the residential streets like John or McNabb and is kept on the principal arteries that are designed for that? And what program will you put in place to ensure that the parking requirements for what you propose will be built within the limits of Pier 7 and 8 so that we don't have people driving around looking for places to park in the kind of fashion that has happened around, for example, Hamilton General Hospital? There are, as I said, 16 other questions, Paul, and we'll try to find a way to get an answer to them. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for standing by the technical difficulties on that. I think it's very clear to say that this plan does not deviate from the North End Traffic Management Plan. All the recommendations that were made as part of those plans are not changed by this study. The urban design study is founded on that plan and those recommendations. And again, back to that careful balance of parking. And as development occurs, it's something that will be ongoing as part of the city's implementation process to make sure there's the right amount of parking, that there isn't undue pressure on the surrounding neighborhoods, and that's something that the city will balance going forward to make sure that they have the right amount. And I think that it's important to know that the studies that are in place are still the foundations of this study. The recommendations of the traffic management for the North End remain in place and will be changed as part of this study.
Okay, we're headed to the back for some questions.
Yes, my name is Larry, and we all know that this is all landfill on an ancient lake silt bed. And I notice you've got any number of multi-story buildings lined up along this pier. And my question is this: have you done any geotech economics as to what it would cost per foot to actually build a building of that stature on here, and any idea of the practicality, the financial practicality of putting it together?
That's been included with the background work that's been done. There's been phase 1 and 2 environmental assessments of the property and geotechnical soils investigations. I don't know if Chris can provide any more specific detail, but that has been looked at.
So what is the cost per square foot to build an 8-story building there?
That I don't know.
My name's Jane, and I'm a little concerned about how...
Jane, if you can hold on just 1 second, we'll get to you in 1 second. I think Chris just wanted to add on just a piece to that last question, if you could, just for a second. Sorry, Jane.
I don't know a cost per square foot to that, but we do have it in one of our background studies. I just don't have the number off the top of my head. The reality is, in the soils that we're talking here, you are building on piles into the bedrock of the area. And on the remediation side, we have done a full phase 1, phase 2. And all things being equal, the remediation is actually not bad in this particular environment, because of the proximity to the water table.
Thanks, Chris. Sorry, Jane. Back, start again. That's great.
Good evening. My name is Jane, and I'm just a bit concerned about the naval aspect of the harbor fund, Pier 7 and 8. And I realize the cadets have been there a long time, but the Haida also is there. And I want to make sure that the Haida is respected, and also it's going to add more traffic. There's a lot of concerns, and I just want to make sure that those concerns are all tied in with First Nations, because remember that the Haida is a tribal ship. Thank you.
Specifically on the Haida, yes, all of our plans are actually predicated on the fact that on the far eastern side of the whole West Harbour area, you do have the Haida, HMCS Star, and Eastwood Park actually being that far eastern bookend. And so the cultural aspect of the Haida being there is something that's very important. In fact, I applaud Brooke McElroy for all of the renderings clearly show the Haida there. As it relates to the Navy League, it was mentioned earlier on, there's no doubt that on the site, the Navy League will have to relocate. City staff as well as the councillor, we're actually meeting with the Navy League this week. We've had a variety of meetings and correspondence back and forth, and we're looking to try to find a solution for them so that they can stay within the area.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, we're headed still at the back. Great. Then we'll take one more at the back of the room, then we'll move back up for a couple more questions at the front, Christine, okay? Two more at the back and then move up. Great.
Hi, my name is Lori. I have the building at 520 James Street North, which is where the curb shop is, and the city of Hamilton is trying to kick them out because of gentrification. I was in court today again, and the stipulation was, you can continue doing what you're doing after almost 17 years, but you have to get rid of the curb shop. So one of the issues in all the meetings that I've been to at Jay's place down there is to deal with affordable housing, but that's not really my question tonight. You've oriented things east-west and north-south. I always thought of Hamilton as the Boston of the North. Boston is the city of light, and I think that Hamilton almost has the opportunity to be the twin city for Boston. But if you look tonight, what's happening, the light is not north, south, and east, west. It's northwest. And this orientation, as the gentleman up here said, is very blocky, and it doesn't deal with that undulating horizon that's almost like a David Margraf painting, right? And I don't know why the people from Brook and Kilroy have not gone out, like, to experience the light and the horizon, to know how to orient this plan in relation to the natural geographic plan or nature of Hamilton. And I would beseech upon you, before you go ahead and make this big implant stamp on the harbor, that you actually go out there 24 hours a day for a week or two to experience the light and the nature that you have around you and create something enduring for the next 100 years, including affordable housing. But aside from that, that's my statement and question and whatever. Okay? I know it's late in the game, but there's actually no rush, okay? We've been here for how many years? Thousands? Hamilton's been here for almost 200 years. There's not a big rush. You don't have to hurry on this. I know Hamilton's poor. I know you got to do your bylaw thing to collect money from people, but take your time. Do it right. As the gentleman said, it's gorgeous. It's a great place. It's a natural harbor. This guy that had it as tenant once, he was with Schlumberger. He'd been around the world, engineering company, and he said, I came to Hamilton because it's the only natural harbor in Canada. Do it right, you guys. Come on. Do it right.
Thank you. I mean, I agree completely. The Hamilton Harbor is an incredible resource, and it's beautiful to experience. And I think that's sort of where we derive that first principle of really having clear views to the harbor. And those clear views are extensions of the existing street network. And we felt it was so important that the existing residents and the existing communities retain those views to the harbor, the naturalized edges across the bay, and really to be able to experience that. So we were concerned about changing the grid off the grid of the existing street network, because we really wanted to make sure that there was this open flow to the water's edge, and that if you were standing on the street edge, that you could continue to see the water at the other end. And although I recognize that that's a little contrary to what you're saying, I think from our point of view, we really do value those components of the harbor, the open views, the connectivity between the neighborhoods, and this future development. And that's something that we value very highly in this plan, and thus the principle of those clear views going through.
Next question.
I'll pick one question. It's not a very sexy one. Is there provision for public washrooms in the design?
Why, yes, there are. Thank you for bringing that up. There's a new pump house that's associated with this that'll pump water from this grade level up to the existing grade. So part of that pump house is to have washroom facilities associated with it. So providing those throughout the park is really important, for children, for anybody who's here for the day. So yeah, great point. Thank you.
One more at the back, Christine, and then we'll move back up front if you're okay with that. Thanks. Yep.
Hi, my name is Anne. There's a thread of sustainability throughout this development. And I guess my question is more to the city in terms of requirements. Will you be requiring that there be LEED certification, at least at the silver level, for anything that's developed in here? And just as a comment, I'll put a plug in that I think we need to try and make affordable housing work at this location as well.
The next phase of this, as it relates to Pier 8, is about developing an expression of interest for how we would go and select a private sector development partner. And as it relates to all the elements, whether it be sustainability or access to the water, or all the different elements of the guideline, they will form, or they'll be part of the EOI as we go forward. I don't have an answer for you today as exactly what would be in it, but that's exactly what we're looking to do over the course of the next few months, and we'll be consulting on that as far as what the expression of interest should look like.
Good evening, people. My name is Marjorie, and I'm wondering what are you planning to consult with potentially disabled tenants about accessible housing in any of the future units?
Again, that will be one of the components that will be addressed through the expression of interest in the disposition strategy. What percentage of units can development proposals or proponents suggest to the city that they're going to provide, and how we work that into the evaluation criteria of those proposals. So again, that'll be set out within that process.
Great, sir.
Can I just clarify as well, one of the key foundations of this report, and I think as it was circulated and people reviewed it, was a real focus on accessibility, and that that the open spaces and the landscapes are all required to be AODA standards, so they're all meant to sort of reach the highest level in terms of being accessible and open for enjoyment by all. So thank you.
For those who are new to the community conversations too, some of the emerging work that was done by a group of volunteers to look at a bit of a decision-making matrix. So we've learned lots about accessibility at the standard and at the level of legislation, but also about how to go beyond that to make things truly accessible. So our conversations have been rich with some of that. So yes, over here to this gentleman, I believe.
Hello, my name is Steve Park. I've been involved with all this since setting sail back in 2002. My first question is actually for the city staff. We have a number of questions that we've tried to propose, and what we would like is that the city direct McRoy to answer some of those questions in preparation or to help us prepare to make a presentation to council on Thursday. Is that something you can do, please, and commit to for us?
But by all means, provide us with a list of questions. I mean, we'll have to take a look and see the volume and the time will take us to respond to them, but I think we could certainly put an effort together to have a response ready for when we're at committee.
Great. My one question for everybody this evening is really about grade levels. What I'm not seeing at all is the grade level in plan form from John Street and Guy Street down to the Pier 8 level. And is there a plan for the whole area to be raised above the existing grade? That hasn't been dealt with.
Thank you. One of the elements that didn't make it into the presentation tonight is a section that's in the report. That section shows that on the blocks that are adjacent to Guy's, where there is a larger height transition from Guy Street into Pier 7 and 8, we're tucking parking in and up against that edge. We're not raising grade, but what we're doing is transitioning. Instead of having a steep grade change as you come into Pier 7 and 8, that's going to be a continual grade change from Guy's all the way to the first east-west street as you're going northwards as the community. It results in a grade change somewhere more in the range of 5% as opposed to the one that's there now. So it's a significant reduction in grade, so you won't have that steep condition as you come in. And it also allows us to hide and tuck parking into that grade change.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Simon. This is a question concerning the cultural plan. You said your plan caters to gathering spaces. But what I'm looking at, like on the west, right on the skating rink, and between the stage, it looks like it's scaled down. So my question is, how will this plan cater to special events, concerts, and festivals, etc.?
That's a great question. Through the consultation process, we heard how much people love to have events in this area and come for events. We don't expect that to change in the future, but simply to provide more open space area for people to spread out a little bit, especially along the entire length of the waterfront park. The programmatic uses that are happening there today will stay, and the events that are programmed there today will also stay.
And keep in mind, this is part of a broader network of parks and open space along the waterfront from Pier 8 all the way over through Pier 4 Park and through to Bayfront Park. So a lot of the larger type of festivals would be in Bayfront Park, and it's smaller programmed events like the yoga idea that was mentioned earlier that could be accommodated here on the Pier 8.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions against the window side here.
Okay, my name is Dave. One of the problems in other projects like this in Ontario is they don't provide areas for grocery stores, butchers, bakers, and they have to actually get in their car and drive. I just wondered if there's any procedure in place.
Certainly within the prime retail land use designation, which will have a commercial zoning in the future, those types of uses would be permitted. So we certainly would welcome a proprietor to locate those within those designations and to serve the residents in the area. I mean, that being said, we can't force or mandate Sobeys to come, but Sobeys Fresh there, but hopefully they'll see the plan and recognize the opportunities that would come along with being in this neighborhood and want to be here.
Hi, my name is Connie, and this isn't so much a question for the design team as it is perhaps a bit of a heads up for the city council and other people, but you have almost about 300 degrees of very deep and dangerous waterfront there. If you're going to populate that area with kids running and playing in parks and running along the waterfront, you're going to have to staff it. You're going to have to staff it for water safety. That's my comment. I also think, though, that along with that, there's a need now, and will be then as well, to provide more ways for the public to get onto the water. We have no boat rentals. We have only people who own their own boat and then can afford a boat slip. Those are the only people who can get on the water right now. And that needs to change. There need to be opportunities for families to come and rent a little paddle boat or a canoe or a kayak. This maybe is not the place for it. It's a bit too dangerous. And I think there was a suggestion back at the setting sail around that time perhaps that it be possibly at Pier 4 boat rentals, and I would suggest a community boating program and along with water safety training and so on. But as far as that goes, you will need water safety staff on that property. Thank you.
Yeah, safety with respect to the edge of the pier certainly will be something that would be considered through the programming of the space and in the more detailed design of those features when they're being developed, and the specifics of how they will be built and would function would be taken to consideration at that time. Certainly with respect to programming, like you said, providing access right down to the water. Again, in this context, Pier 8 is part of the broader waterfront, and there will be opportunities to provide that sort of access on some of the other piers like 6 and 7 or over on Pier 4 and Bayfront Park as well. So within that whole network of parks, there'll be a whole range of different activities and opportunities for different types of recreation or accessing the waterfront.
My name's Doug. I have a two-part question. One, there's going to be a lot of destinations, people coming to this, and congestion. You mentioned about parking. One, has there been provisions for the marina, for people who have boating, that visitors and or the boaters have a spot to park? Two, of the parking that you suggest, is this going to be free paid parking or is this going to be paid for?
I'll start the question. In terms of the types of parking, whether it's paid parking or not, it's not something that's determined as part of this study. We are really looking at the character of the neighborhood, so the character of streets, the character of the buildings. The parking question, I'll put to Chris.
As it relates to the marina, I think it's first of all important to note we've been working with the Royal Hamilton Yacht Club right here in this building and with the Hamilton Port Authority, Harbour West, the marina, all along as we've been looking at the marina. On the parking issue for the marina, we totally understand the relation between the parking amenities and the marina access. This solely deals with Pier 8 and parking as it relates to Pier 8. And I think that Jessica mentioned it earlier on, one of the keys to remember is that Pier 8 doesn't develop over time, or it develops over time. It certainly doesn't develop like a light switch and it all happens overnight. So the balance of Pier 8 will be available for parking throughout much of this transition. We're currently doing the parking study relating to the marina for both this whole area just out in front of this building. We'll have a solution to that over the next the coming weeks and months, and then we'll integrate that in with the marina rebuild.
Got time for probably two more questions. Christine, where are we at here?
Hello, my name's Dennis Street. I lived at Houston and Guy's for 26 years. It was a very simplistic area when they went down there. Now this is the flagship of Hamilton. Everybody wants to get into it. But now I see people, money, investments, all taken into a smaller area, which I think is nice. But I look out here, and that's what I see in my house right now before you guys get building away and whatnot. And then safety is my biggest concern. I've raised my 3 girls there. I see cars racing down that street on Guys all the time. I see fire trucks racing down that street all the time. When you get the people in there and you start getting fires, you get sick. Oh, you get people late at 3 o'clock in the morning peeing out the front of my place there. It's going to be chaos. And you should protect that area because it's I believe in simplicity. And that's where it started when I came. And like I say out here, that's the way it should remain for the people.
Thank you for your comment. Christine, we have one more at the back and then there's one in the front, and that way you can end up here at the front.
Back here.
Okay, and then we'll come up to the front and close off this part.
Yes, hello, my name is Tony, and this is for Paul, this question. Obviously, this is going to be transformative to the neighborhood and to the city, as well as the LRT. And I noticed people were talking about affordable housing. How can we maybe translate this transformative project into jobs that's going to, for people that are hard to hire, people that are with different needs, people that are newcomers? Are there programs to transform these projects into jobs directly to Hamiltonians?
So in short, yes, job opportunities exist when you're talking about this type of development over a long period of time. In terms of public sector investments, there's actually legislation now that requires there to be targets set for involvement around apprenticeship type programs and the ability of use of public money to help train people and also employ people. On the private side, the bottom line is that this does keep the economy moving and keeps jobs going in the community as well. So there's an opportunity in the development not only of the LRT project, but investments down here from a jobs perspective as well. And that's it. So thank you for raising that. Our final question goes to the woman here at the front, and then we'll wrap up.
My name's Allie. This is more of a timeline question because I know you said you're ready for, estimated shovel ready by 2018. So for what would be the timeline for phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and from a residential perspective, the opportunity to, when do you approach that opportunity?
So Chris is right beside you and probably has a better sense of timing. You can just use that portable mic, Chris, because we're finished here.
So Council's asked us to present an expression of interest by the end of this year for 2016 in the hopes of actually having the first building, the first shovel in the ground for 2018. How it would exactly phase and over what time horizon, we really don't know until we talk to the development partner. Our guess is it's about a 10 to 15 year build out from the first building to the last entry point in. But obviously that'll depend on the market, on how many are sold, both on the residential side as well as the commercial, and the construction as it goes from there.
So in closing, I'd like to thank you for the questions and the comments that came forward. Catherine has been collecting the information and inputting that information, and as I mentioned to you, that will be put forward as part of this is what we heard from this session. Encourage those who wish to stay behind and talk with both staff from the consulting firm as well as our city staff. In particular, Herman and Stephen, probably good for you to connect up because time is of the essence to make sure those questions get in the hands of staff and the consultants so they can be addressed. But others as well, people will hang around here. I'd just like you to show your appreciation to the staff and the consulting team who presented tonight. I think they did a nice job of being concise. For your participation this evening. Everyone here is open to hearing your comments and feedback one-on-one, and have a safe journey home.